The end of Week 14 marked an important milestone in this NFL season. It has the last set of byes on the schedule, meaning that every team will play 4 games in 4 straight weeks to close out the year. We are practically entering the witching month of football. But before sitting down to watch the games being actually played, let's grab our calculators and do some math. Specifically, I want to share one equation that will hopefully not only explain what has happened so far in this NFL season, but also give you some insight into what might happen next. So let's get into it. I first came across this formula while watching Moneyball. In between looking into Brad Pitt's wondrous eyes, a thought occurred to me. What math are Billy Beane and the A's actually using? In particular, I was interested in this equation, seen here. So after making my letterbox review, I channeled my inner plankton and went searching for this formula. Luckily, I quickly found the answer. It's this. Created by the godfather of sabermetrics, Bill James, this formula predicts how many wins a team should have won based on the number of runs they scored and allowed in a season. Now, if you took 8th grade math, you might recognize the similarities between James's formula and everybody's favorite triangle man, Pythagorean's famous theorem. So it makes sense that this baseball equation is called the Pythagorean expectation because it expects wins. For example, the 2024 New York Mets scored 768 runs and allowed 697 back. Putting it into this formula gets them an expected winning percentage of 548, or 89 wins. And how many wins do they actually have? 89. Safe to say that this formula has become a cornerstone of this Moneyball movement, with some slight adjustments because of course there are, we're talking about stat nerds here. One of these adjustments was making the Pythagorean expectation work for the NFL. Now of course the original Pythagorean expectation is meant for baseball, but it can be adapted to other sports by changing the exponent, this little guy over here. For hockey, the optimal exponent is said to be around 2.11. For basketball, it's 13.91, which actually Daryl Morey, the current GM of the 76ers, figured out, by the way. And for the sport this video is actually about, football, it is traditionally said to be around 2.37. But this can be improved. To put it simply, the exponent is related to the offensive environment of each sport. That's why basketball, for example, has such a high exponent when compared to the others. But of course, in football, not every team has the same, let's say, offensive strategy. A ground and pound team like the Steelers has a very different offensive approach when compared to a gunslinging team like the Lions. Both can be conducive to winning football, but again, very different. Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders came up with a way to account for this differing offensive environments. Basically, every team gets their own exponent, determined by this formula. If you understand this formula, good for you. If you don't, do not worry. All you need to know is that after plugging in some numbers, the answer will give you the amount of wins a team should have actually won. Let's do a full-on example from this NFL season. The Indianapolis Colts have scored 267 points and allowed 298 against them. Put into the log formula gets you this. This is the exponent that we will use in the main formula, which will be this, which equals their expected winning percentage. Multiplied by the 13 games Indy has played already gives the Colts 5.6 Pythagorean wins, rounded up to 6, and how much wins do they actually have? 6. Now hold on, both of the examples I've given so far show when the Pythagorean expectation and the real world perfectly line up. But in reality, that doesn't always happen. These are the interesting cases. Comparing the Pythagorean wins to actual wins is an amazing way to tell if a team is actually legit or on fraud watch. You can kind of think of this formula as getting rid of the luck involved in football and unveiling the true quality of a team. For example, the 2022 Minnesota Vikings had an impressive 13-4 record, top of the NFC North and set to face the 9-win New York Giants in the playoffs. Minnesota were favorites going into the game, but when you looked at the Pythagorean wins, you could see that the Vikings weren't actually all that. They had a Pythagorean record of only 8-9, a massive 5-win gap between expectation versus reality. The Vikings would go on to lose the game to the Giants, surprising odds makers, but not the people who used this formula. Last year's Eagles are another example. They were 10-3 after 13 games, but the Pythagorean expectations show they really should have been more like 7-6. They would go on to lose 3 out of their last 4 regular season games and get blown out by the Tampa Bay Bucks in the playoffs. Of course, this formula can also help predict who is primed for a glow up. The Chargers had the worst difference between their actual wins 5 and their expected wins 7. This shows that LA had a more talented team than their actual record. Of course, this year they've shown this to actually be the case, and yes, I think that Jim Harbaugh is an upgrade over Brandon Staley, but still, this equation did predict that the Chargers had better days ahead. All this to say is basically, I've used the Pythagorean expectation formula for every NFL team this season to determine what should be their record after 13 games and hopefully get some insight into who might rise and who might fall. So here are the results. This column, let's call it the should have difference, shows the win discrepancy of each team. Green means that they have more Pythagorean wins, and red means that they have less than in reality, and obviously the number being the actual difference. This column shows how many places each team moved up or down respectively in this new standings. As always, pause at any time to analyze it for yourself, but what strikes me first is that in both sets of standings, the same exact 14 teams are in the playoffs. This relation hasn't happened in at least the past 5 years, and I think it confirms what many are thinking, that this year's playoff picture is already pretty clear. I mean, maybe the Bengals can hunt down that 7 seed, or the Falcons could start playing well and beat out the Bucks, start Penix, but overall, the playoff field of 14 is already pretty set. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Lions and the Bills to be the top of their conferences, especially Detroit, who has looked unbeatable at times. Also, as a Seahawks fan still loyal to Russ, I'm personally very happy to see the Steelers in second in the AFC. Putting it in order of win difference now, which should show who might rise and who might fall. Again, the should have difference is the difference between a team's Pythagorean wins and their expected wins. So for example, the Broncos have 8 wins in real life, and the formula indicates that they should have 8.5 wins. So 8.5 minus 8 gives the Broncos a should have difference of positive 0.5. If a team is in the positives, they are probably better than their record shows, and the opposite is true for the teams in the negative. Once again, feel free to pause to make your own assumptions. The chart is also available in the description, but anyways, I find it funny that the 3 teams with the worst should have difference are 3 franchises known for their misery. I do feel bad for Jets and Giants fans, but I really am sorry for the Bears faithful, who've lost in some truly heartbreaking games that they probably should have won, like the Commanders' Hail Mary, or the last-second block field goal against the Packers, or even when Eberflus forgot what a timeout is against the Lions. But hey, hopefully this formula shows that good times might just be on the horizon. I also am surprised that the Pythagorean expectation shows that the Ravens should be as lackluster as they have been. My expectations for Baltimore were sky high going into the season, and they clearly haven't fully lived up to them, but there's of course still time to make some changes before Lombardi comes a calling. And finally, let's address the big elephant in the room, the Chiefs. It's safe to say that Kansas City is having one of, if not the most black magic Houdini level escapism seasons of all time. It literally seems like it's every single week that they channel their inner Rasputin or Michael Malloy and somehow escape death to get another win. The Chiefs clearly should not be 12-1, full stop. Yet, they are. And I think the story of Kansas City shows that the Pythagorean expectation unveils something else. Who is clutch? Just look at last week. Everybody's talking about how the Chiefs were extremely lucky to get that doink walk-off kick to go through the uprights, and that is true, but it is also true that to get to that kick in the first place, Kansas City conducted a masterful 4-minute drive with a big-time 3rd down conversion from Mahomes and Kelsey to top it off. That block punt against the Broncos could be considered black magic, but it also could just be a well-coached, amazing special teams play. Last-second win against the Panthers? Another perfect 2-minute drill. Overtime win against the Bucks? Well, even if you get the coin toss, you still have to drive the field and score a touchdown. I could go on and on, but all I'm saying is that yes, the Chiefs have been lucky this season. But luck isn't the only reason why they have the best record in the league. This year's Pythagorean expectation for each NFL team may show that the Bucks can be dangerous in the playoffs, or that the Texans should probably have more losses and might slide, but it also shows that the Chiefs just have something that can't be measured by points for and points against. Whether it's because they have Mahomes, Andy Reid, or some guy at a barbecue shop in KC made a deal with the devil, I don't know, but there's no denying that the Chiefs are clutch. This formula shows that the Chiefs should not win this many games, and again, yet they do. And honestly, I think that's what makes them so great.